All right, let's get started on the EIPIP meeting number 14. The first agenda item is the network upgrade process. Um, we usually talk about that with James, but he's not going to be here today. But we do have a note from Edson, a proposal from him for the network upgrade process. It's in a GitHub gist and a comment at the bottom of the agenda page. So, Edson, if you want to just kind of go through that, it looks really interesting. Feel free to take it away.
Should I share my screen?
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
All right, can you see?
Yes, I can.
All right, so I just started to brainstorm a list of statuses. Let's start with that. Um, so these are just possible solutions for hard fork coordination process. I separated it into two categories, like what the statuses are and how to move from one status to the next. These are just ideas, something that we can discuss on to see whether we should move forward or not. But I'll start with the statuses. One's eligible for inclusion, so this opens the discussion for the hard work. Implementation, the decision to implement them in clients before testing. After the implementation is done, they could be motioned to do testing, to have the decision to have the EAP tested, to be a test net or just state net tests, fuzzing, etc., or a combination of these. Once that, the next step is staged, which is the decision for it to actually go into mainnet, which includes deciding what date to put it on. So once it's decided both it's included and a date has been set, then it's staged. Deployed is that date is passed and it's live. And rejected is during any of these, if it doesn't pass from one to the next, the EAP is rejected. Meaning the EAP isn't going to be eligible for mainnet. Any questions about the first one?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, just rejected, like, for example, I'm imagining ProgPow, and a lot of people would want something like that to move to rejected, but anyway, I'm just wondering what some of the thoughts are of how things like that would be determined.
Yeah, so for here, it's just the status is not really how it's determined, but
Right.
that could be a good way to figure that out. The next one, I just simplified it, so made it into three. So sentiment and gathering sentiment from community for the demand of the AP. So this is should the AP be implemented? It's asked first, then refinement. The AP is implemented and tested. So testing and implementation are in the same step. And then it's done when the spec is made final. And then deployment, the time for release is chosen and the EAP is released. So it's the same as the previous, except a lot of the statuses are put together. Three. And unstaged, same as rejected. So it's stage one, stage two, stage three. On stage, EAPs withdrawal from consideration into hard work. Any questions about this one?
These four that you're going through, these groups of four, these are not complementary, these are options, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Well, I mean, you can, if you like one from one, we can include it in another. That makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. We
Have
can
to,
mix and match, but like for the moment, they're separated, like as just this idea stage. Yeah.
yeah. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, Pooja.
No, I was just going to ask, like, these statuses that you have mentioned here is going to be statuses attached to EIPs, right? I mean, um, similar to like EIP process, or how we are planning to like put them in that.
This is for hard fork coordination.
I get that part. Like, my question here is like an EIP that would be undergoing the process of EIP in first place, and maybe at the same time parallelly it will also be moving across the process of hard fork coordination. So the statuses that is generally mentioned in the header of an EIP is these statuses of hard fork coordination would also be added in addition to the EIP status, or how we are planning to consider this.
I think we should have this conversation another time. Because I think we already have discussed it, right? We weren't gonna include the status um in the EAP, but maybe include it into a meta EAP. But we could add another header um specifically for core EAPs.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Please go ahead. And maybe at the end of this proposal, I would like to, mention my like another counter proposal, which is like different from statuses, where I prefer to call them as stages. So please, first, let's continue this. Sorry for interruption.
Yeah, I mean, like here I call it stage. So instead of like statuses, stages, whatever, it's just kind of the steps in the EAP process. I mean, hard fork coordination process. So here's the third one, eligible, estimated. Here we estimate a schedule for we define the scope for the EAP for, so how long it looks like it might take. And then develop public review. Public review is just another synonym for auditing, testing, final requested changes. Public review, we can have things like auditing. It implies stuff like that. Final approval, the EAP is frozen. It has to be frozen for it to be in final approval, and then it has to be approved for mainnet. Final release, the EAP is live on mainnet. And maintenance, we monitor the EAP to see if it is working as expected. And yeah, for a period of time, it might be a couple months or something. Any questions about that? Okay, the next one, eligible for consideration, functional, status meaning the EIP works as expected, it's implemented, it's working, secure, there's proof that the EAP poses no security threats, meaning it's well tested, and deployed. Status meaning the EAP is live on mainnet. So these are the things that are updated after each of these. So after testing is done, then you add that it is secure, versus here you're in testing when you start testing, you're secure after you're done testing. You're functional after you're done implementing. Any questions about that? All right, what do you think about all of them? Like compared one to the other?
I like the first one the best, I think. Maybe adding maintenance to it would be cool. I would need to think on all of it more though, but just my initial reaction is that I like the first grouping.
So for the first one, I think that the first two items could be combined.
Any other thoughts?
I also like the first one more because it is more like in it's closer to the EIP process itself, but I would prefer calling it as stages to differentiate between the state and stage when we are considering EFI. However, I am not, as I mentioned my reservation earlier as well, like I'm not very much comfortable having it all together in a separate repository. Uh, but the process wise, number one looks good to me.
Uh, Personally, I think number one looks good as well. With number two having the stages, I think it could also be helpful just to know, like for example, what Alita was saying about how number one and two could be together. So maybe stage one could be number one and two. Stage two could be like testing and staging, and then maybe stage three could be deploying, or rejection would be the other, whether our other option happened. But either way, I think stage one, and then maybe adding the stages in that way.
I guess so. It's looking like a combination between the first one and then elements from other ones, like maintenance, using staging to differentiate where it is. It would be great if James was here, get his feedback too. So
Yeah, in fact, do we want to save the next part for when James gets back for him to review this and then for us to have a full discussion? I only say that because otherwise we might have this whole discussion again the next meeting if he's one of the primary people we need opinions from on this.
Yeah, I would agree.
What do you think, Edson?
yeah, I could take the feedback and create a fifth option, and then wait until James is here to continue discussing.
Cool. And then, Pooja, you had something about this though. Was that like directly related to this? Did you want to say that now or at the end of the meeting, or?
I think I can share that. I'm gonna share a link in the chat itself, and if
So I have a quick sorry, go ahead.
no,
I'm
please,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, please go ahead, Anita.
Oh no, it's okay.
So yeah, that is just another proposal, but maybe in a different, from a different perspective. Like I mentioned that I wanted it to keep it closer towards the network, I mean the present EIP process. So this is again another proposal for network upgrade, but in a different format. So here I have tried to specify try to put it in the form of EIP. It's coming up from the EIP that was proposed last year for that time process when we were doing schedule based. But now, since we have changed the process and we are doing more EIP based, so I've tried to change the process based on the EFI. And I'm just, anybody has to say something? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, this is good. I like that you did this. And Edson, thank you for your document too. That's very helpful.
Yeah, Edson, could you put a link to that document in the chat? I haven't seen that yet.
It's the last comment in the agenda too, if you need to reference it later,
Oh,
Brett.
in the agenda. Okay, cool, thanks.
So, for the document you just posted, Pooja, I think this is a tough one because we created a test repo for putting things, and this is something we can just go and delete if we decide we want to change it later. But for the moment, we did create a repo for called ETH 1.0 specs for specifications like EFI and other, like a summary of the EIPs that go into network upgrades and just kind of that sort of thing. So proposing an EIP.
So just to I mean like be a little I'm just trying to be a little flexible here. I have actually marked a specific section where I'm talking about GitHub repository, and in the comment section, I have mentioned that if we are planning to have another repo, we can put this thing in that repo.
Oh, okay, okay. I was looking at this the wrong way. Okay, that makes sense.
So the process, what I was trying to put here is like trying to define the preconditions for the EIPs to be considered as an EFI. So I mentioned two precondition, it has to be a core EIP and it would not be applicable for any other. The statuses can be anything from draft to final, because we have seen that the EIPs, as soon as they enter into the, as a PR form, people have started considering it for EFI, because we want to be like, just with the speed to not delay the upgrade because of any particular EIP. So those are the preconditions, and the proposal can be I have mentioned these like different stages: proposal, socializing, and a reviewing of an EAP. So one thing that I was trying to be flexible here is like once an EIP is created, what I mean here by EIP is created is by the pull request that is being created in the EIP repo. And at the same time, if people want it to be considered for EFI, they can go ahead and create an issue in, I personally mentioned here as EIPIP repository part. If we have another test repo, it can be replaced by the test repo. And whatever is suggested here, the repository can be changed. But my thought process was like, we should be following the EIP numbering process, because at the end of the day, the EIP has to be having a specific number, and that is defined by the pull request number that is there in the EIP repo. Other than the regular processes, I have mentioned one other new point here is socializing of an EIP. Like earlier, socializing was just by having a magician thread, discuss it in ACD Gitter. But there is this new proposal that I mentioned in previous cat herders meeting, and we would like to have others feedback as well, although I shared it with few editors earlier and we received some good feedback on that. It is about a video series on EIP, where we would discuss some EIPs, because sometimes author has this thing in mind that ACT call is not good enough to explain the EIP, and even if we do, it takes most of the ACT call time, and we don't get to explain the EIP the way it should be. So having a 30 minutes kind of thing for dedicated to that EIP would be a good reference point, and it would be helpful in socializing that EIP with community. Other than that, there are some review process steps, and I have suggested a tracker board for the stages that I was mentioning earlier. Like these EFI can be tracked with the tracker board. My suggestion was for EIPIP repo, but I'm okay with changing it to test repo. And the stages that proposed, accepted, it's very much similar to what Edson has already proposed, maybe one or two terms here and there. And on top of that, mention some conditions in which an EIP can be moved from one stage to another if it is under the list of EFI. So that's the whole process. If anybody has any question, comment.
I think this is great. I need to look at it more before I give further feedback.
Yeah, sure.
Pooja, do you mind relinking?
You want me to share it again on the chat?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I just did.
Okay. Well, it looks like we can probably go on from there, unless anyone else had any other comments on Edson or Pooja's things.
I think Light Client had was supposed to come up with ideas also.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, I spent some time thinking about this, and after a little bit, I just realized that I don't have enough context, and I don't feel like I can really give a good um, proposal on how to actually upgrade the network, because I think, it's important to come up with the organizational flow of how this happens, and I think you guys have done like a really good job with that. But that's something that we can definitely like come to consensus on at some point. To me, like the most difficult problem is how can we get for developers to agree on making something happen, and how can we have the community buy into some sort of roadmap for Ethereum. And to me, these are like really difficult problems, because something that someone thinks is a good idea, a core developer may not think it's a good idea, or they don't have the bandwidth to implement. And so like my struggle with trying to come up with something is, how do we kind of overcome this? And I don't really have a good answer to it. And I think like really the only things that I can think of is that, one, we need to avoid any sort of chain split at all costs, even if it's I don't know. I don't know how to define a minority that says this is okay to just chain split a 10% of the community thinks it's bad. But like, let's say, in the instance of ProgPow, this was something that was, hotly debated amongst the community, and so we wanted to avoid a chain split there. And so I think that was important, even if people thought the EIP was like technically sound and maybe it was good for the network. I think it's important, because I think that it would be pretty devastating for DeFi. I don't even know what it means to have a chain split with DeFi anymore. So I think that's like one thing that we really need to avoid. And the second is that there are things that are coming in the future that are going to be very contentious, like proof of stake and sharding and stateless. But to me, I think that as long as we have a more formal definition of what like the Ethereum roadmap is and like what people are buying into, then it's okay for us to make these decisions. And we don't have something like that written down formally, but I think that anyone who's been in the community long enough has been aware that Ethereum is moving to proof of stake, and that we're going to have sharding, and these are things that will happen on this network. And if someone splits a chain, someone splits a chain, but this is what they've kind of implicitly agreed upon by being a part of this network. So for those sorts of things, like we kind of have this we should have a more formal definition of what this roadmap is, what our principles of Ethereum are. That way we can say, yes, this is a contentious upgrade, but this is what you bought into. This is what we've been saying we want to do for 5 years.
Yeah.
So that was
Oh,
kind
sorry.
of
Go
my,
ahead.
yeah, that I was just wrapping up. That's like really what I had thought about it. I think I don't have a good answer. I just think that those are, the summation of the thoughts I had on that topic.
Okay. I guess I really like that direction because it makes it a little bit more clearly defined what the community's values are. Like you said, I don't know if it's in the scope for EIPIP, only because we already have so much on our plate, and a lot of the defining whether the reasoning behind if something should be chain split or to avoid it is something that's more in a procedural and not even procedural. That's the wrong word. It's in a I guess non-procedural thing where it's like that's decided based on people running nodes, and even deeper than that, that's decided like a direction on that is decided based on the procedure. We don't need a procedure to decide the direction of a chain split, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that this is not something that falls under the authority of the EIPIP group. I think I don't know how to build this collective community roadmap. We already have some sort of implicit one, but to have a little bit more formal one to point to in the event that we have these contentious network upgrades in the next 2 to 3 years. Yeah.
So one idea I would kind of throw out there is if we had EIPIP is focused on the drafting process, and then if you had a separate, I think maybe even is what the EFI is. I'll be honest, I'm not 100% clear on that, but if you just have like a separate process for the actual implementation of something once it's proven to be technically sound, it would be potentially beneficial of the EIPIP group to define at what point it changes from right, a drafting process to an implementation process, which I think is what you're talking about.
I think the whole network upgrade process is like completely separate from the drafting process. Maybe there's some, you know, back and forth behavior where we start implementing something and realize that something in the EIP needs to be updated. But to me, like everything that's been discussed before this is all about, you know, how can we? I mean, we're implicitly saying like we have these statuses or these stages, and we can just go from stage to stage to stage. But I'm just trying to point out that my question is like, how do we actually figure out how to go from implementation to, you know, shipping? And I don't think that it's right to say just because I've implemented something in every client and it's technically okay that you know we should have some sort of like some sort of, you know, very rigorous definition that because I implemented it, because it's in these clients, we can ship it. I think that there needs to be more. I think there needs to be more people who are formally defined as, you know, being accountable for the changes to the network. We kind of implicitly have that, you know, with the Go Ethereum team, but they need to be accountable that these changes are going to be good for the network, and they need to have rationale why those changes are good. Or like if they're going to gatekeep a change, they need to have rationale why it's not a good change to the network. And these are things that like go beyond just, you know, having stages and, you know, the organizational flow of it.
So
Yeah,
another,
so
go ahead, Edson.
yeah, so that was the next part I excluded, which is how you move from one stage to the next. So it should deal with like, should EAPs get in versus are they technically sound? Because that's the issue we've been having with the past contingency EAPs. That yes, they're technically sound, but like, is it like ethical to include data, or is it okay to include from a philosophical perspective? Is there actual consensus for it to be included so there's no hard fork? No chain split. I mean, so that's probably something we should consider outside of the statuses, but I think having statuses defined or stages defined is a good first step. The next step would be how you move from one stage to the next.
Yeah, also just my opinion, you guys know my point of view on this, but everything Light Client is talking about is critically important. And he's basically talking about building and tracking consensus in the large community at scale. And that's exactly what Canonizer is designed to do. So in other words, when an EIP comes up, someone can start a topic on that EIP, and it starts out like a petition. Everyone starts signing the petition, and if he can prove that there's a lot of people on board with that EIP, then you know it's not going to be contentious. And if someone else has a different point of view, they can create a competing camp, and the community can organize around that. The camp statements can change dynamically, unlike a petition. A petition can't change once the first person signs it, but these are designed to be changed and modified and negotiate and build and track consensus. And so you can track in a large community how much consensus there is. And if you can, and basically it doesn't need to be formalized or defined or anything. You can just see, yep, we have 90% of everyone, and well, we have different ways to canonize things. You can canonize, eventually we'll have the ability to canonize things based on minors, based on EIP, or based on how much people can vote their ether. We'll have quadratic ether canonizer algorithms. Anyway, just my opinion.
What I'm hearing is that the general EIP drafting process and implementation process could do with sort of separation between the whole consensus problem as well as the general drafting problem, which is something that maybe we should draft up. Something, say, like for each step, you know, have like a parallel consensus protocol that's being followed.
I think that this is a good conversation. Maybe we should continue it with James here.
Yeah, that's why I keep thinking. I wish James was here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to box it up right now.
Okay,
Unless anyone has last comments.
we can time box it. Alita, did you have, or was your point um, responded to?
Yeah.
I had to check a message real quick, so I wasn't listening. Sorry.
Oh, that's
Um,
no worries.
okay, so next up would be constraining the EIP repository scope, which we kind of were back and forth on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think we can skip that too
Yeah,
because it makes sense to James. And since Lightline is here, so we can go to the next agenda item we would like to hear.
yeah. This one is on working groups, exploring the idea of working groups, and there is a link if you click on it to um, a chart and a comment from Light Client. So yeah, Light Client, if you want to just do a summary of that real quick.
Yeah, so I guess first before I, talk about working groups, rather than, coming up with a solution in search of a problem, I thought I would share like what I view as some of the things in the IP process and just, the repository that I think are problems right now. And I think, and there's like two main ones. And the first one is that I think the proposals are generally low quality. There's not a lot of effort is put into a lot of these proposals. They're usually hacked together, and then it's just kind of left up to editors to guide these people who are really not even that enfranchised into being a part of the process. They just decided to make a pull request in 2 hours. They've written something, but they really haven't even read each one. They don't. They're not. They're not trying to make like a really quality technical document. I think this creates a cycle where proposals are low quality, and so the people involved in the EIP process, the editors, are not incentivized to really take the time to make the proposals better and to really guide those people because there's just a lot of low quality, and so them not being enfranchised to be a part of part of the process leads to more low quality. So I think that's a cycle that's happening right now in the EIP repository. The second thing is I think that there's not a lot of people who are willing to make unpopular decisions in the EIP repository to reach the goals of having higher quality EIPs or to have more informative EIPs rather than changes. And I think that instead, everything is just accepted in the repository because that's the path of least resistance for the editors to do. And so I think that these two together are just creating like a situation where the EIP repository is not something that people in the community are super proud to be a part of or to have. So if we're not proud of the EIP repository, this isn't like a set of very strong technical documents, then less people are like willing to contribute. And so we're having this problem where it's hard to get people to be editors because this isn't like a prestigious role to be playing. And I think that we can fix that. And I feel like working groups, I feel like, adding some sort of additional hierarchy to the EIP process would be helpful. And to me, like, I feel like working groups is something that pretty much every standard organization in the world has. And it's something that Ethereum can implement into the EIP repository. And so in that comment, I just, shared a couple of just like very, generic potential working groups that I think could add value. And we can talk all day about how should we structure the working groups, what working groups should there be, like what are their roles and responsibilities. But at the end of the day, I think that in order to improve the overall quality, we just need to be giving more people ownership of the repository. And by giving people ownership of the repository, we can make them accountable for the changes. And so if we have a working if we have a working group around the EIP process like we kind of have here, then we need to be held accountable for making the process better. We should have some people who are in charge of the actual or like the infrastructure behind the EIP website. Like what happens if we make a change to the continuous integration suite? Like I made a change last week that Hudson you had merged, and I didn't realize I made a mistake on removing some quotes from a hard fork meta, and that caused the titles to be be erased. And so like we fixed it in a PR, but there's no one who's really accountable as far as I can tell for these sorts of changes. This is my mistake, but there wasn't a group of people going to this PR to make sure that it's all sound. And so I
Yeah,
think that having these working groups, and we can do this in a very, very lightweight way. It doesn't have to be very overbearing, but just having more people involved in the process and advising them, I think that's going to improve the quality overall of the entire process.
yeah. I think that's some good thoughts. I think starting small on that is definitely important. So having just a few working groups to start on specific things is kind of a trial, and also utilizing GitHub's triage permission level at the repository would be good to start with to get people like used to using the repository. And like I'll put the link in the chat, but there's something called a triage level permission set where contributors can proactively manage issues and pull requests without write access. So that, and also there's maintain, which is project managers who need to manage the repository without access to sensitive or destructive actions. So that'll be nice so that people can't just like sneak in and do a ton of stuff with write privileges at first if we don't trust them or if they need like time to get adjusted.
And honestly, I'm not even sure if the working groups are people who should have write access to the EIP repository. They can, sure, but to me, it's almost like they're going to aid the editors. If the editor's job is not to technically validate, it shouldn't be to technically validate every EIP. There's so many different aspects of Ethereum. You can have someone who really understands the EVM, and it shouldn't be their job to also understand like all the different token interfaces in depth and like how they should be working together. And I think like a great working group would be some sort of interface working group where you have a couple of people who really understand these, and they should play a role in commenting on in the EIP repository. They don't necessarily have to have the right permissions, but they just need to say, hey, this is our working group has goals. This is our roadmap. We wanted to design tokens that are, in what you propose does or does not fall kind of like within what we're working on. So this is like our feedback for you to like improve this. And the EIP editors can come in and see that, okay, the working group has comments on it. They either think this is like a go or a no go. I can just go ahead and make sure that everything is like syntactically correct, and I can just merge this.
That's all the comments I had.
So to clarify, is your primary suggestion that we have sort of panels of experts per se, and or auditors to verify changes that are made to a certain like category of EIP?
I think that the way that you describe it there is more of a reactive way. And I would rather the EIP or the EIP working groups be more of play an active role in the process, rather than saying, welcome to the working group, you're going to just review EIPs that come in. I think that they need to actively be playing a role and say, this is the working group for interfaces. These are our goals as a working group. We're going to design EIPs that meet these goals. If other EIPs from the community come in, we're going to be a place that can help give them feedback or help direct them to the right, to EIPs and efforts that are more in line with what the goals of the network are. This isn't stopping anyone from coming up with their own EIP and implementing it, but I think that there's already these implicit working groups. There's different like levels of how like formally defined they are. We have the 1X working group, and they have their sets of goals they're working towards. And so they should be being held accountable for that in the EIP process. I think it's weird that 1X is such an important upgrade to Ethereum, but it's not mentioned in the EIP repository anywhere.
Okay. Anyone else have comments on that? Okay. Let me find the agenda because I clicked off of it to get to that comment. Where is it?
Well, I guess my last question is, how do we make something like this happen? How do we? I mean, you're the only editor. I guess Mike is here, but I don't think he has his voice on. So you're really the only editor here who can like, kind of make these sorts of decisions.
Yeah. I don't have an answer. I wish I did. Now that Micah's an editor, come to me and Micah, and we can start to relay this idea. And maybe if you or someone you know wants to be like the first guinea pig for this type of thing, then that would be helpful. So if the plan's there and we have someone who could be a guinea pig, then me and Micah can go to the EIP editors channel and pitch the idea. I think that's probably the best way to do it.
Okay, I'm happy to be a guinea pig. I'll write
great.
something a little bit more formal for you so that you can
Sure.
share.
It doesn't even have to be. Oh my God, my phone. I'm gonna turn it off. It doesn't even have to be too long. But
Sure.
yeah, just whatever you want to make it more like official that you want to contribute for sure. That'd be great.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, James showed up. Hey, James.
I did. Sorry, I'm very late. I thought it was in 15 minutes.
No problem. Um. Okay, standard format. So which one? I'm on agenda 13. What am I doing? My life is a mess. Okay, now I'm back. We are now going to item number 4, new EIP validator. The EIP validator was integrated. Oh, congrats! Thank you, Light Client. Um, Here's the validator EIP PR. It's in that comment. And Light Client, for those who don't know what the EIP validator is, can you tell us more about what that means and what you accomplished?
Sure. So the EIP validator is part of the system that runs every time you submit a pull request to the EIP repository. And what it does is it's checking to make sure that the EIP is syntactically valid. So make sure that the EIP number is there, make sure that the status is one of the known statuses, that the category is one of the known categories, all these things. And there's some other things that I'm hoping to add into it, like it's going to make sure that all of the headers from the EIP1 are being respected and these sorts of things. So the first version that was kind of at parity with the old EIP validator that was written in Ruby has been merged into the EIP repository.
Awesome. Anyone have comments on that?
Thank you, because we've needed that for updated. So it is very awesome of you to do that.
Yeah, it's greatly
Definitely.
appreciated.
I have one question while we're on the topic. I know that Micah had requested that the withdrawn status be added to the validator, and I wanted to make sure that we're on the same page of adding that, because I know that this is kind of mixing the newer statuses with the older statuses.
Is withdrawn in EIP1? I forgot.
I don't think it is.
Um, I don't know then. What do other people think?
I think we should present the statuses, the new ones for the EAP process to the core devs meeting, get final approval there, and then start adding it to the EAP repo.
I also think that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, that's not a
rather
bad
than
idea.
Going and just dipping the toe half in.
Cool. So yeah, I guess put a pin in it, and we will come back and pull that pin out later when we talk to the core devs or something. All right. Anybody else have anything on that one? Okay. Onboarding EIP editors. That would be a survey to set expectations of an EIP editor and triaging permissions. Oh, I'm getting feedback on your mic, James. There we go. So for the survey, I think that's Edson, right?
Survey has been sent out. We should wait 2 weeks for the responses.
And then the triaging permission, I alluded to this a little bit ago with my GitHub link that I posted. But there are permissions we need to explore when onboarding new editors to get like junior editors to have like the triaging permission or a lower permission than write privilege in order to kind of get up to speed on EIPs and monitor them and stuff like that.
I'm also happy to guinea pig that if you need someone to make sure it's working okay.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be cool. Let me make a note of that real quick. Light client. Cool. I will talk to the other editors about that. Okay, so the next item is discussion on Muir Glacier Postmortem Report PR 2809 and Network Upgrade Postmortem Template PR 2810. Those are both in the EIP's repo. I think that's Pooja on both of those.
Yeah, I don't have much update on that other than that thank you to Light Client and Micah for at least resolving we are past bots for that. And I'm happy to move the PR, I mean, and close or reopen or whatever is required in the future to get this listed somewhere as an informational EIP.
Cool. And if we do ever move a lot of the stuff to a new repo, would we just move this one as well? Or
I would think the postmortems and launches stuff should go in the new repo.
yeah. And we should actually talk more about that because I want to make sure everyone's on the same page. The repo was created. I don't know if we ever fully decided as a group what goes in there. So my understanding was that things that involved EFI, like updates to EFI, and also reports on network upgrades. So I guess these postmortems would count in that, would go into that new repo. But what do people think? Is that a good idea or?
I'd agree, but I'd also be interested in hearing more from you guys.
Yeah, because they're EIPs, right? They're informational EIPs that Pooja's worked on. And I wouldn't want to merge this and then suddenly move it or move it and then want to bring it back or anything like that.
Just one concern that I have mentioned earlier about the storage format, like if we are planning to store it in form of EIP. If not, then it is fine with me because I'm not sure if we decided on the format of it. And if we are planning to decide it in some of the EIP format, I'm concerned about the number system for this.
Ah, yes, I see. So that might need to be, that can actually be decided between you and James and anyone else who wants to be in that discussion outside of the call, the numbering system. Because if that's solved and then we can move it out of the EIP repo, that would make it so that there are less EIPs in the repo that have to be dealt with by editors and they can move to that new repository that's just dealt with by James and whoever else is, admins in that repository, the new one.
And I even though we're moving EIPs over, I don't imagine them being moved as in the same format or as EIPs, because we have an opportunity to optimize the format for the specific case of what we're doing outside of the EIP process. Like I think a lot of what we've done is somewhat held in, at least by formatting and content, by the limits of the EIP process previously. So we have an opportunity to make it to improve on that. And then Mike had also said in chat that he suggests I want everything that is specific to mainnet to be in that new repository, mainnet and Ethereum operations, such as coordination, etc.
That's a good point, Micah. What we ended up doing, and I think I might have posted this before you got here, but where is it? Oh, maybe I didn't post it, but there is a repository for ETH 1.0 specs right now. And the reason we're calling it that, if you go to Ethereum, and I'll also post this link, and you type in the word specs and search, so if you do this second link I posted, you'll see all the specs. There's ETH 2.0 specs, stateless Ethereum specs, and then ETH 1.0 specs. And I'm hoping that 1.0 and 2.0 will get merged at some point, but I'm not positive that'll happen immediately. And I think there's someone outside. I'm going to check on that real quick. I'll be back. Y'all can continue.
So if I understand it correct, like for this, these PRs that are related to postmortem, whenever we are moving to 1.4 specs repository. I to mention it as like EIP 2810. Instead, I will be using it as network upgrade, or maybe retrospective that we decided in the previous meeting, like retrospective report .md. Am I correct to understand this?
Not totally. I mean, you're right that it will be different. I'm not totally sure what it will be yet. I think we should take some time, and it would be great to get in the issues on the repo. If you have idea, that would be a good place to add the network upgrade suggestions or other sorts of things for how to handle this moving forward. I don't know what it will look like immediately, but it will be something I hope different.
Got it. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment. I don't know how much you guys talked about the naming convention here, but I think that ETH 1.0 specs is very different from the 2.0 specs repository, unless someone is planning to go back in and rewrite the yellow paper in some sort of spec format. It seems kind of weird to use that as a coordination repo.
So I was actually planning on editing the yellow papers. Is that something that you wanted to coordinate offline?
I mean, I guess I just think that the yellow paper should probably live in ETH 1.0 specs now, because the ETH 2.0 specs repository has all the specifications required to implement an ETH 2 client. But for ETH 1, we don't necessarily have that. That's kind of mostly the yellow paper.
I like having everything that you need to write an ETH1 client be in ETH1 specs. I mean, that would include all of the a list of all of the EIPs that are currently active on mainnet and the yellow paper.
I guess, the weird thing is that the ETH2 specs repository doesn't, they don't have the concept of EIPs yet. And so I don't know what the proper way of integrating the idea of incremental changes like that needs to be backwards compatible to a specs repo. I think this is mostly bike shedding at this point, but I'm just trying to say that if we're going to have a specs repo, it should probably be all inclusive, including the yellow paper.
I'm fine with that. And ETH2 hasn't figured out how they'll update the spec. They haven't had a EIPs to ETH2 quote unquote yet.
No.
So they're on the other side of this for us. But that didn't really make much sense. But yeah, I would agree that it should be inclusive of things like the current state of it, of Ethereum mainnet, and all you need to do a client. So just to review, if we take the stuff we talked about being on the ETH specs repo, it would be hard fork coordination, network upgrades, EIPs that are a list of EIPs that are connected to mainnet, the yellow paper, and postmortems and retrospectives on network upgrades.
By the way, I'm back.
Hey. Light Client suggested that we also do the yellow paper if it's going to be an ETH1L specs, that it should be inclusive of all things that require to make a client, including the yellow paper.
Maybe. I don't. It'd be kind of weird to move it from its current repo, but coordination for updating the yellow paper could definitely go in the ETH 1.0 specs repo, is my thinking initially.
I guess my thinking was just looking at how these two specs repo is modeled, and everything in these two specs repo essentially defines how to write these 2.0 clients. So if we have these 1.0 specs repo where it only has some like new upgrades, that seems like it doesn't follow the,
For this one, it doesn't have to, because ETH 2.0 had the benefit of being able to start fresh, whereas our stuff, has a lot of baggage from other repos and a lot of history. So like moving like the yellow paper file out of the old repo would erase all of that previous pull request that people have to reference, and branches and things like that for different like Byzantium upgrade and stuff like that. So I'm more worried about the collateral damage of moving the file itself into the repo, but referencing it from the repo I think would be appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, we can figure out whatever the right way to do it is. I just don't think that, baggage should stop us from making a like cohesive specs present.
Yeah, of course. And we would definitely put like yellow paper as a part of this, go here to look at the yellow paper and go here to coordinate it, kind of a thing, like direct people on the README. That's more what I was thinking. But if you had something more in depth, then we can definitely see about that.
I mean, in the ideal world, someone would rewrite the yellow paper in the same sort of format, the Pythonic format that the ETH2 spec is in. But, that's a huge task and a
Yeah.
large ask.
That'd be awesome, though. You're right. That'd be really cool.
That'd be so cool.
Okay. I think we're out of time, actually, so we might wrap this up here. For now, let's pick up on the yellow paper talk for next time, or in the chat. And were there any final things people wanted to throw out, since we didn't get through much of the agenda before we go, that would, they would have been waiting to get an update on or wanted some feedback on before we go? Okay.
Feel free to make issues in the specs repo about the specs repo, or suggestions and things like that. That'll be a place where discussion can start happening around it.
Sounds good.
All right. Hey, thanks everyone. A lot of good stuff was brought here today. I'm really, really happy about the progress. See you all in 2 weeks.
Thanks, husband.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.